You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and a lot happened in the last 24 hours in the sports world. Before I get into what I'm going to talk about, I want to tell you what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about the Eagles potentially being open to a LeSean McCoy reunion. McCoy had said in the past that he was open to a return with the Eagles, and that just seems like old news to me. I don't want to rehash it. I spoke about the Eagles yesterday, possibly bringing in Devontae Freeman. They need a backup running back. I don't care who they bring in, Freeman, Hyde, McCoy. It doesn't matter. It's not worth going too far in depth into. I'm also not going to talk about the Nets' internal conversations about Bradley Beal. I've mentioned that in the past, that the Nets could pursue a third star. I have no problem trading Karis LeVert for Bradley Beal. I like LeVert a lot, but for Bradley Beal, you do it. Jared Allen, I like him, but he's going to be off the team next year. Taurean Prince, definitely a big contract. Get that off the books. I would absolutely love it if the Nets traded for Bradley Beal. It makes them probably the title favorites. I'm also not going to talk about Jamal Adams and the Jets reaching a stalemate. That is something I've spoken about a lot, the possibility that Jamal Adams could be traded. I mentioned it before the draft. I mentioned it after the draft, when the Jets picked Ashton Davis. I think it's a very, very big possibility. I never stopped believing that it was a possibility. The one thing I'll say is, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but I'll say it anyway. Depending on the haul, I have no problem with the Jets trading him. Now, they can't give him away. They have to get it at least one first rounder, preferably two. But I'll settle for one. Give me one first rounder and another high pick, maybe a player also, and I'll be happy with that. I would rather spend the money elsewhere. Sign Clowney, finalize Ryan, sign Larry Warford, and if you trade Jamal Adams and get a quarterback's ransom for him, I'm all for that. I like Jamal Adams. I have nothing against him. A lot of people were telling me, Jake, if you hate Jamal Adams. I don't hate Jamal Adams. I like Jamal Adams. But he's a strong safety. The least important position on the football field. I really have no problem with the Jets trading him if they can get a quarterback's ransom for him. Also, one thing I've seen, people saying Jamal Adams is the best safety in the league. He's not. He's the best strong safety in the league. He's not the best safety in the league. The best safety in the league has to be a free safety. The free safety is exponentially more important than a strong safety. Ergo, the best safety in the league has to be a free safety. I mean, besides Troy Polamalu, can you think of a strong safety that has had a huge impact for a Super Bowl winner? Because I can't. Again, nothing against Jamal Adams, but if the Jets can get a quarterback's ransom for him, do it. Trade him. Yes. I have no problem with that. If he is traded over the weekend, I promise you, I'm going to post an emergency podcast reacting to the trade, just like I did for Kenny Atkinson. Okay. On to the big stories. The NFL laid out the rule proposals that the owners will vote on Tuesday. The first one is the alternative to the onside kick. It's something that you saw in the AAF. Instead of an onside kick, you can have a 4th and 15 from your own 25-yard line. I think it makes perfect sense. I didn't watch any AAF games. I have no idea how it impacted games, but the onside kick just doesn't work. I mean, it's fun to see when done right, but how many times do you see it just go straight into the receiving team's hands and that's it, game's over? There should be a mechanism for the kicking team to get the ball back late in game. Now, you can still do surprise onside kicks. This rule is not getting rid of the onside kick. It's just an alternative to it. If you're down by 7 late in the game, you have the option of kicking an onside kick or attempting a 4th and 15 from your own 25. I really think that's a great idea. I'd love to see it. Try it for a year and let's see how it works. It can't be any worse than the onside kick. I know for a fact that the percentage of converted onside kicks is insanely low. I don't know what it is exactly, but I'd love to see this for a year and see if it's better. If it results in a better outcome for the kicking team. Or should I say the team that will remain on offense. There's also a proposal for a permanent expansion of automatic replay to include scoring plays and turnovers negated by a foul and any successful or unsuccessful point after try. I mean, that makes sense. Scoring plays and turnovers are automatically reviewed anyway, but if there's a flag on the play, there's no review. Now, I really don't like the idea of penalties being reviewable, but that's not what this is. My whole thing with the penalties being reviewable is it's going to slow down the game exponentially. This won't slow down the game exponentially. It will slow it down. But we'd have the clock stop anyway. Is this elongating that stop? Yes. But I think this is worth a try. I don't mind trying that for a year and seeing how it goes. I mean, the pass interference being reviewable was insanely stupid. It didn't work. I'm glad it didn't work. But I'd be interested to see how this goes and the successful or unsuccessful PATs. How often do the refs mess that up? I mean, I guess it makes sense to have that system in place, but how often do they really mess that up? I'm not crazy about that element of it, but I don't mind trying it for a year and see if we really need it or not. The Dolphins proposed something that would give the defense the option to make the clock start on the referee's signal if the defense declines an offensive penalty late in the first or second half. That's unnecessary. We don't need that. That's adding a crazy element to the rule book that no one's going to understand. I'm actually having a little bit of trouble understanding it. No, I don't like that. I don't like introducing things to the rule book that are going to complicate the game. The game has enough foibles as it is. No, I don't like that. The Ravens and Chargers proposed a sky judge and a senior technology advisor to the referee. The senior technology advisor to the referee is insanely stupid. We don't need that. I don't know what that guy would do, but that's not necessary. The sky judge is something that's been advocated for a while. It really picked up traction after the no call in NOLA, Nickel Roby-Coleman, with the blatant pass interference that the referee just missed. I mean, one of the worst no calls in sports history, if not the worst no call in sports history. Mike Pereira has advocated for the sky judge for a long time. I like Mike Pereira a lot. I read his book. I respect him a great deal. But here's my thing with the sky judge. You're going to slow down the game exponentially. For every blatant no call that the sky judge catches, there are going to be 10 ticky-tacky calls that he sees. I mean, newsflash, there's really a penalty on every play. There's holding on every play in the trenches. There are a lot of times that you can call pass interference, and it's really, really close. I mean, introducing a sky judge just slows down the game a lot. I don't mind the idea of a sky judge, but we need to put something in that says he can only make calls. He can't reverse calls on the field. But if there's a no call, he can make a call on a penalty if it's egregious. If it's an egregious penalty and the referees miss it, first up, they shouldn't miss it, but if they do, then that's when the sky judge comes into play. Now, it would be up to the sky judge to discern what's egregious and what isn't. But I think that's the only fair way to do it. Now, it's kind of interesting who would get the final call if the sky judge calls a penalty, but the official on the field says, no, I was watching it, there was no penalty. It'll be interesting to see who gets the final call there. Maybe it would be the head official. Maybe there'd be some kind of a review system, but I don't like that because that's slowing down the game. That's reviewing penalties. I don't like that. Adding a sky judge should happen. It just brings a bunch of new wrinkles into the game. The competition committee made a couple proposals to increase defenseless player protection for a kick or punt returner who's in possession of the ball but hasn't had time to avoid or ward off the impending contact of an opponent. That's really stupid. We don't need that. If you think you're going to get blasted, just wave your hand in the air for a fair catch. You want to tell me there are some instances where the gunner shakes off the other gunner late and the punt returner doesn't have time to react to it? I mean, this rule is really just for punt returners. This will never come into play for kick returners. I mean, you can tell me that for a punt returner, but that's the name of the game. I don't want to take that element of football away. It's a violent game. It's a physical game. Alright? I understand that the game needs to be as safe as possible, but, we can't wrap everyone in bubble wrap and make it touch football. Alright? We just can't do it. There are going to be injuries. There are going to be bone-crushing hits. And there will be a lot of people that don't like it. But you know what? The real football fans will. That's who the NFL needs to cater to. They can't worry about the non-football fans who see the game as too violent. They need to cater to the hardcore football fans that like the bone-crushing hits. Now, I'm not saying make it a free-for-all out there, but you need to keep some element of danger in the game while making it safe. There's also a proposal by the competition committee to cut down on game clock manipulation by disallowing multiple dead ball fouls while the clock is running. That's a Belichick rule. I absolutely love it. Truth be told, I didn't even know that was a thing until the Jets-Patriots Monday night game when Belichick did it. And then Mike Vrabel did it against him in the playoffs. I mean, that was great. But yeah, that's not something that should be a thing. It makes a ton of sense to clean that up. I hope that gets approved. There are also some proposals for changes on injured reserve rules. The first one would allow up to 3 players who have been placed on IR to be allowed to return later in the season. Currently, it's only 2. I have no problem upping it to 3. That makes a ton of sense. The second one is kind of weird, but I can explain it. Players who are placed on IR prior to final roster cutdowns would now be eligible to return. So something like that happened with the Bills. Kurt Coleman was cut by the Bills prior to final cutdowns in order to keep Jason Kroom on the final roster. Coleman was healthy, Kroom wasn't. Kroom was then placed on IR the next day. So he was eligible to return later in the season, and then right after that, the Bills re-signed Coleman. I know it's kind of weird to explain, but that is something that needs to be cleaned up. It's really stupid that teams need to do that. Streamline it. Make it as easy as possible. I don't mind that. I like most of these proposals, I gotta tell you. The injured reserve proposals make a ton of sense. The alternative to the onside kick, I love. The automatic replay for scoring plays and turnovers negated by a foul, that makes sense. The game clock manipulation makes a ton of sense. It messes up something that Belichick loves, which is a plus in my book. And the Sky Judge is a good idea. It just needs to be refined a lot. Alright, it's time for the return of a segment that I haven't done in a while. And it's up to you to make me do this. Tweet at me, at RealJacobValk. I love hearing from you. I love knowing what you want me to talk about. I love seeing your opinions. One of my favorite things. It's Twitter time. Tara Cooperman at 64 Passionflower, and evidently a big Carrot Top fan, wants to know my thoughts on the Knicks' new assistant GMs. I didn't talk about this because I didn't think it was important to, but I am nothing if not a man of the people. For those of you who may have missed this, the Knicks hired Walt Perrin, formerly of the Jazz, to control their college scouting, and Frank Zanin, formerly of the Thunder, and actually former interim GM of the Nets, to control pro scouting. And I gotta say, I like the moves. They make perfect sense. They both have good heads on their shoulders. Perrin has been given a ton of credit for being the guy who discovered Donovan Mitchell for the Jazz. I think it's pretty safe to say that pick has worked out. He's a hard worker. He's a fixture at every big scouting event. That's a really, really good hire. And Frank Zanin has a ton of experience. He was interim GM of the Nets when the Nets fired Billy King and then replaced him with Sean Marks. It actually went Billy King, Frank Zanin, Sean Marks. But I don't remember what Zanin did as GM, if anything. I don't even think he made a trade. Also, if memory serves, I don't even think he had the authority to make any big trades. I think the Nets wanted to wait for the full-time GM to come in, and then they'd make their big moves. I don't know if I'm misremembering that or not. But Zanin brings experience. It's important for Rose to surround himself with experienced front office people. If the Knicks are going to bring in a guy with no front office experience to run their front office, he better surround himself with people with a ton of experience, and he's done that. He kept Scott Perry. Bad move, but still. Perry has a ton of experience. He brought in Brock Aller as their capologist, formerly of the Cavs. Really smart guy. No complaints there. And now, Perrin and Zanin. You gotta like the staff that Rose is building. Now, having said that, he can bring in the smartest people in the world, but it doesn't mean anything if he doesn't put a good product out on the floor. What scares me about the Knicks is that they're gonna try for a quick fix type trade. Something that they've done in the past. I've heard rumors of Chris Paul, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. I mean, I've heard a bunch of things. Just go with a slow rebuild. I understand it's painful. And if you want to make the argument that you've tried that before and it's failed, you're wrong. That's something I've seen also. We tried the rebuild and it didn't work. Well, no, you didn't try a rebuild. You tried a rebuild for a little over a season. Ever since you traded Porzingis, you tried a rebuild. That's not enough time to say that the rebuild failed. Just go with a slow burn, slowly build up a winner. Let's see if Barrett's the real deal. Let's see if Knox is the real deal. Let's see if Mitchell Robinson is the real deal. Build up the young core you have. Eventually, you will make the playoffs. If all these guys pan out, and I think they will, I think R.J. Barrett's going to be a really good player in this league for a long time. Frank Ntilikina, very good perimeter defender. Mitchell Robinson has a ton of potential. Kevin Knox, I still feel like there's something there. Build up the core you have, and then you'll entice big free agents to come. The worst thing you could do if you're Leon Rose is go for a quick fix trade. The Knicks tried this with Carmelo Anthony. They gutted their roster to bring in Melo. They didn't have the pieces necessary to build a team around him. Who were his best teammates? Amari Stoudemire, Jeremy Lin, and Kristaps Porzingis. Okay, Melo and Stoudemire clashed. Jeremy Lin was good for 3 weeks, and then the Knicks let him walk. And Porzingis was hurt all the time. If the Knicks are going to try to trade for a superstar, you've got to make sure you still have the pieces necessary to put a good team around him. I don't want to hear free agency. No, that doesn't work. No big free agent is going to want to come to a losing team. All you have to do is look at last year. Slowly build up the core that you have. It can work. I like the young players that you have. I really do. Hire Kenny Atkinson as your coach, as much as that kills me to say, but I think he's the right guy for the Knicks. Then you'll make the playoffs in a few years. I really think you will, assuming all these young guys pan out. Which, again, I think they will. And then you'll entice big free agents. But to try any shortcuts? No, that's not going to work. That's how you ended up in this mess in the first place. Also, the Knicks aren't expected to retain Gerald Madkins, Craig Robinson, and Harold Ellis. I mean, that's to be expected. The new guy wants to bring in his own people. Nothing against the people that he's letting go. Madkins, Ellis, and Robinson, but it was to be expected that they wouldn't be back with the Knicks. All in all, I like this new front office by the Knicks that Rose is building. I don't like that he kept Scott Perry, but Aller, Perrin, and Zanin are smart guys. I like the fact that Rose is surrounding himself with experienced people. It should give Knicks fans a reason to hope. I do want to talk about the very, very sad death of Jerry Sloan. He had been sick for a while, but it still really, really hurts to see him go. Everyone remembers him as the former coach of the Jazz, and he was a great coach for the Jazz. No question. But I want to start off with his playing career. Very few people remember this. Jerry Sloan, in the mid to late 60s to mid 70s, was a really, really good shooting guard. He made his name as a player with the Bulls, but he spent his rookie season with the Baltimore Bullets. Didn't do much, averaged less than 6 points a game, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists. But the Bulls saw something that they liked in him and took him in the expansion draft in '66. Immediately, Sloan dominated for the Bulls, made an all-star team, put up 17.5 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, shot 43% from the field. I think if there had been a 3-point line, Sloan would have put up really, really good numbers. But even without a 3-point line, Sloan put up great numbers. With the Bulls, he averaged 14.7 points per game, 7.7 rebounds, and just over 2.5 assists. And those 7.7 rebounds a game are really impressive when you remember that he was a shooting guard and he was 6'5". I understand that there weren't as many big men back when he played as there are now, but it's still pretty impressive that he got that many rebounds. And that speaks to his tenacity. Jerry Sloan was a guy who played the game the right way. He was a 6-time all-defensive player. I mean, he would lock down everyone. It's kind of interesting to think how great his career would have been if he didn't get injured. In '75, '76, he suffered some knee injuries. It sapped him of his explosiveness. He wasn't the player that he once was, and he retired at the age of 33. But he meant so much to the Bulls that they retired his number 4, becoming the first retired number in the history of the franchise. But he loved the game too much to stay away. He almost coached for Evansville. If he had taken the Purple Aces job, Jerry Sloan would have died a lot sooner, because that was the year that they had that terrible plane crash. So that's one of those divine intervention moments. After working his way up the ladder with the Bulls, he ended up as their head coach. He made the playoffs his second year, 80-81. They won 45 games, but they lost in the Eastern Conference semifinals. They got swept by the Celtics, and Sloan was fired a little over halfway into his third season. After that, Sloan went to the Jazz as a scout. He then accepted the head coaching job of the Evansville Thunder of the Continental Basketball Association. But the Jazz knew that they had something special in him, so they made him an assistant coach. Sloan stayed there for 4 years. The head coach that Sloan was working under was Frank Layden. Really, really good coach for the Jazz. He was also team president. That can wear on you, doing both. And Layden stepped back as coach to focus just on his front office duties, and he appointed Sloan to replace him. Immediately, Sloan made an impact. He led the Jazz to their first 50-win season, the year he replaced Layden, and he followed that up with 3 other 50-win seasons. Meaning that the Utah Jazz, after never winning 50 games in a season, Never in the franchise's history, with Jerry Sloan at the helm, won 50 games for 4 straight years. I mean, those teams with Stockton and Malone, Darryl Griffith, Thurl Bailey, they were insane. Mark Eaton as the defensive anchor holds the record for most blocks per game in a career. I mean, those teams were great. Obviously, it was due mainly because of Malone and Stockton's insane pick and rolls, the best pick and roll duo in NBA history. But Sloan was the guy who was integral in helping them fine-tune that. I mean, all you have to do is watch early games with Stockton and Malone playing together and Layden as the coach, and you can see they're not as good. Then when Sloan gets there, immediately you see the pick and rolls, and they're insane. They should be required viewing for every basketball team, from little kids to NBA players. That's how you run a pick and roll. The Jazz weren't able to get over the hump, though, until 96-97. They had some really, really tough losses. They lost in 6 games to the Trailblazers in the 92 Western Conference Finals. In 94, they got destroyed by the Rockets in 5 games. Hakeem Olajuwon was insane in that series. And then in 96, they took the Supersonics to 7 games. But Shawn Kemp was a man on a mission in that game, outplayed Karl Malone. Gary Payton outplayed John Stockton, and the Supersonics won Game 7. And there was a real question of, would the Jazz ever be able to make an NBA Finals with this core? But then, in 96-97, the Jazz had their best season. They won 64 games, were the second best team in the NBA that year behind the Bulls, and made it to the NBA Finals after beating the Rockets in 6 games in the Western Conference Finals. And they played the Bulls insanely tough in that series. The Last Dance, while they focused obviously a lot on the 98 NBA Finals, they didn't talk a whole hell of a lot on the 97 Finals. The Jazz came very close to winning that series. Malone was insane. Stockton was insane. Jeff Hornacek was good. Really underrated player. Brian Russell was good. Again, really underrated. 3 of the Jazz's losses in that series, games 1, 5, and 6, were by no more than 4 points. Those games could have gone either way. Game 1 they lost by 2, Game 5 they lost by 2, and Game 6 they lost by 4. Then in 98 they come back, as we all know. All the turmoil surrounding the Bulls, this will be Phil's last year, and what's going to happen with MJ, what's going to happen with Pippen, what's going to happen with the Bulls, and the Jazz came close to seizing that turmoil. They were better than the Bulls in the regular season. All you have to do is just watch the games. And you can see that they were better. And again, it was a very competitive series. 3 of the Jazz's losses, again, were by no more than 5 points. Game 2, they lost by 5. Game 4, they lost by 4. And Game 6, obviously they lost by 1 because Jordan and Brian Russell were going up against each other. I mean, Jordan's going to win that battle. That's the biggest knock on Jerry Sloan. He should have doubled Jordan. Brian Russell could not stop Jordan one-on-one. And that wasn't a push-off, by the way. You can't call that in an NBA Finals. It's close. It's really, really close. But in the NBA Finals, you have to let them play. That was not a push-off. After that, Stockton and Malone never came close again to winning an NBA Finals together. Malone obviously went to the Lakers to try to chase a ring. It didn't work. Stockton spent his whole career with the Jazz. It didn't work. And it seemed like the Jazz were going to kind of fade into obscurity. No one was going to remember them. And for the next few years, it looked like they were right. But then the 06-07 season rolled around. Carlos Boozer came back from an injury and made an all-star team. Average day double-double. Mehmet Okur made his only all-star team. Deron Williams, in his second year, took a major, major step forward. I'll get more into Williams in a minute. Matt Harpring was a key shooter off the bench. Derek Fisher was a great veteran mentor for Williams. AK-47 played great defense. Gordon Gierachek was a lights-out three-point shooter off the bench that year. Paul Millsap, in his rookie year as a second-rounder, contributed. That Jazz team won 51 games and made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals before losing to the Spurs in 5 games. But think about that. You missed the playoffs for 3 straight years. Everyone's written you off. And then you win 50 games and make the Western Conference Finals. For the rest of his time as Jazz coach, he kept the Jazz in the playoff hunt. But then him and Deron Williams started clashing. Carlos Boozer left for the Bulls in free agency. Mehmet Okur got hurt, finished his career with the Nets. Matt Harpring had long since retired. Derek Fisher went back to the Lakers. Andrei Kirilenko went to Russia. And even then, never regained the offensive form that he showed early in his career. Was still really good defensively, but wasn't great offensively. Gordon Gierachek had long since retired. Paul Millsap was still there. He was playing really well. Al Jefferson came over from the Timberwolves. He was playing really well. But that was it. And that caused a lot of friction between Sloan and Williams. Williams was upset partially with Sloan and his system. I mean, Sloan was a tough guy to play for. Really fiery guy. Wasn't afraid to get in your face. Deron Williams didn't like that. And the Jazz were losing a lot. They were making the playoffs, but they weren't doing anything. I mean, think back to those old Jazz teams. Did you ever look at them as legitimate NBA title contenders? Because of that clashing, Jerry Sloan resigned. It seemed like it was going to be Darren Williams' team. But then 2 weeks later, after the Nets miss out on Carmelo Anthony, they trade for Darren Williams. And by the way, I don't want to hear that trade didn't work out. Alright? Think about what that trade was for a minute. Alright? Devin Harris, who obviously would have to be traded. Darren Williams is better than Devin Harris, alright? If you're bringing in a starting point guard, you've got to trade the incumbent starting point guard. So, yeah, it made perfect sense to trade Devin Harris. Derek Favors, who the Nets should have given more time to, but in his rookie year, he didn't look that good. A first-round pick, which later became Enes Kanter. That was the third overall pick that year. Okay, that's a tough pill to swallow, but again, for Darren Williams, you do it. And another first-round pick, which the Jazz later traded to the Timberwolves, and the Timberwolves used it on Gorgui Dieng. Dieng has done nothing in the NBA. I mean, people forget how great Darren Williams was for the Nets. Think about it. After missing out on Carmelo Anthony and furthering the notion that the Nets are always going to be the little brother to the Knicks, the Nets trade for a guy who a lot of people thought was the best point guard in the NBA, made an all-star team with the Nets, averaged 16.5 points for him, 3 rebounds, 7.5 assists. That trade worked. It just ended poorly. The pressures of New York did get to Williams at the end. But for 4.5 seasons, Darren Williams was a damn good player for the Nets. And some of those years he was great. Yeah, maybe the locker room leadership wasn't there, but I mean, again, this is a guy who made an all-star team for the Nets. Averaged 21 points a game the last season in New Jersey. Re-signed with the Nets to be the best player on the first Brooklyn team. I mean, that trade brought an identity to the team that it had been sorely, sorely missing. I don't care what anyone says. That trade worked out. And Joe Johnson did too, but that's for another day. Jerry Sloan finished his career with a 12-21, 803 record. When he retired, he had the third most wins in NBA history for a coach, behind Don Nelson and Lenny Wilkens. Now he's fourth all-time. Greg Popovich did overtake him. But Sloan was a great coach, great player. May he rest in peace. In breaking news that makes me really glad that it took me longer than usual to edit today's podcast, Jerry Sloan dying changed my plans up immensely. The Jets just signed Joe Flacco to a 1-year deal worth $4.5 million. That is a fantastic move for the Jets. They needed a proven backup to Darnold. Was I okay with James Morgan as the backup? I could have lived with it. I could have lived with fails. But Darnold is a guy who has never stayed healthy. From mono to the injury he had his rookie year, This guy just has injury concerns. And it's a shame that the Jets have never had a proven backup. They tried Trevor Siemian, it didn't work. They tried Josh McCown, it didn't work. Joe Flacco is a former Super Bowl MVP. While he will never be that quarterback again, he's still really, really darn good. And now becomes one of the best backups in the NFL. This is a fantastic move for the Jets. Great, great job, Joe Douglas. It's impossible to dislike this move. Oh man, really, really. Job well done, Joe. Really. I'm sorry for ever doubting you. I hope you have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay inside. Maybe we'll get some more news on when sports will come back. The NHL is supposedly thinking about a 24-team playoff when they come back. That hasn't been decided yet as a legitimate proposal, so I'm not going to talk about it until it's actually proposed. Regardless, there will be something to talk about on Monday. Until then, I am Jacob Valk saying that it's what you learn after you know it all that counts.